Hello, everybody. Greetings. I'm glad to see you again, to be here with you again. And thank you for listening to the wonderful video with Keith Kristich, who I met actually online through Instagram and Facebook and just loved all the posting, all the stories he had. And I thought, I want to talk to this interesting young man who has so much to say about God. And I was interested in his life story in our series, God in Life Stories from Pain to Passion to Purpose to Peace. Where does Keith come from and where is he now and where is he going? That's a big question. And I'm so happy to have him here on our God in Life Stories. Keith, hi, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. You actually remind me of a friend of mine from Germany who you look very similar to him. And when I saw your stories and your posting on Instagram, I was just so intrigued. It's just so wonderful. But we're getting into that. Your understanding of God, your understanding of the divine, of how God is working in your life, and your spirituality. So, can we start talking about your past, your childhood, where you're coming from, how you grew up, and what God meant to you, religion, church?
Mhm.
That would be wonderful if we could start that way.
Sure. Yeah. Back to the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, for me, I grew up in New York State and in a very evangelical household. Both parents were raised Catholic and found their way into the evangelical world. And that's sort of where I had roots really for the first 18 years of my life. And so, to be honest, it was pretty healthy evangelical. It wasn't hyper conservative as a lot of those churches tend to be these days. And I sort of found my footing in there just as a place of comfort and a sort of a home. So it wasn't anything overly negative in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And I even ended up going to an evangelical college where everything sort of began to shift a little bit during that time. So,
Uh-huh.
but I'll say from the roots, from the starts, it was pretty healthy and mature, sort of a solid foundation for as healthy as religion can get, I suppose, at least at the start of it. So,
Yeah, yeah. So do you like we all have an image of God. The book God, how God changes our brain, from it's
mhm,
Waldberg, and I forgot the other neuroscientists. And they were saying that our image of God really defeats our prayers, or
mhm,
if we have a vengeful God, an image of God, then how can this God really be with us, help
mhm.
us? So can you tell us a little bit about your image of God
Yeah, well,
back
I
then?
back then or now?
Back then, and
Oh,
then
back
come to
then,
now.
sure. Yeah, well, I think back then it was sort of what I was sort of given, like birthed into an image of the guy in the sky. That's how I think of God as the great being, like the super being that's literally somewhere, the king of the clouds, if you will, somewhere in the heavens, which was outside of me. So um, it wasn't like an overly vengeful, angry God. It was a God that loved me and loved me personally. It was a very personal God. But if I were to really put an image to it, it was an old white guy. I think a lot of people grow up with that image that God
Yeah,
is, he's got this long beard and it's a he and it's a him.
right.
And so it was good because it was still based on love, but it was certainly one image and one, not, certainly not the only image worth holding on to. So,
So let's go on from childhood. And you said it was healthy, and you mentioned as healthy as a religion can be. And that made me listen. So, what does that mean to you, as healthy as religion can be?
well, I guess maybe I was too generous in saying that. I think that, religion is one of these things that it could be used the right way, it could be used the wrong way. It's a tool and an instrument that's, I think, meant to enlighten us and transform us and become greater human beings, more loving human beings. And a lot of good and healthy religion does that.
Mhm.
Unhealthy or immature religion just sort of locks God in a box. It creates that dualistic thinking of us versus them. People are inside of God or inside the church or outside the church or inside the religion, and we're damned for hell. And I think that sort of unhealthy religion was partially certainly the part in the world of evangelical for sure, but I think when it came to my personal relationship, that emphasis that we have a relational energy, a love exchange between God and myself, it was a healthy personal experience. I wouldn't say that it was a healthy or mature theology as far as how I perceive God these days.
And so can you go a little bit from there to how you see God now? What happened in between? I mean, like, were there any turning point that you could pinpoint or a development that slowly happened? You mentioned earlier that you went to an evangelical college.
Yeah, yeah. I went to a school where I met my partner, my wife. We've been married, we're going on 8 years, and we met there, and that was a beautiful place. And that was just taking a lot of religion and philosophy classes, and just sort of in spiritual formation classes as well, and just was a space to sort of open up and expand and really let go of a lot of older ideas that I was holding on to. And so it had to be in 2009 that I began to sort of spontaneously just enter into meditation. I had, been going to a Mennonite church of all places, and that was a beautiful experience. But during my own sort of quiet prayer, I was entering into this like spaciousness of mind and like openness of heart. And the silence was just overwhelmingly powerful, and I had no idea what to make of it. So I thought, I think this is meditation. I'm accidentally meditating. And that at the time equaled Buddhism. So then I was studying Buddhism. I was going to the library, just reading on my own, which was super helpful because Buddhists are great at meditation. But within a few months, I had some good friends invite me to a Franciscan friary. Actually, the same order, OFM, the same order as Richard Rohr. And this friary they're wonderful Catholics. They let us lowly Protestants in on communion. Maybe I shouldn't say that out loud. But they're awful Catholics in all the right ways, and they were using this word contemplation and union with God, and they were teaching centering prayer at this retreat center. And so it was there that I sort of was understanding, well, maybe this is meditation, but maybe it's really contemplative prayer. Like the form of meditation it is this contemplative orientation, this mystical union between God and myself. And so throughout developing those practices and just really leaning into the silence, there's a whole new orientation, because it was no longer about me speaking to God outside of myself, but rather opening up to the divine presence alive and well within me. But it certainly took practice and leaning into the silence to experience it directly.
Beautiful. So was it in this friary that you discovered the contemplative side of Christianity? You hadn't heard about it before, or it hadn't. You said it was almost like accidentally that you got into meditation.
Yeah. Oh, it was a total accident, and it was certainly the first time hearing about it. The evangelical world begins, as far as history, it began with Martin Luther. Like that's where the truth was revealed, and so we were sort of just denied that whole contemplative, mystical tradition within the church history. And so it was very eye-opening just to learn about this whole mystical path that we have, and to honor what's at the roots of what we have. We don't have to go looking outside. I affirm people supplementing their religion or their practice with other religious orientations, but certainly the Christian tradition has a meditative path on par with any of the other great religions.
Yeah, I know. And when my husband became a priest in the Episcopal Church, and I said, I remember going to a spiritual director and saying, I cannot do this because inwardly I'm a Buddhist. I love silence. I love meditating. I had learned meditation through the Buddhist tradition. And then when we went up to the seminary and I learned about centering prayer and contemplative spirituality, I was like, thank you, God. And really, it's a beautiful tradition that not a lot of people know about. There's still a lot of people saying, what are you doing? Is this meditation? Are you a Christian? Are you a Buddhist? Does that happen to you? Do you encounter like that you have to explain that to people, or?
Earlier on I did, but at this point, just sort of the circles I swim in, people are generally pretty comfortable, and I think people are in general are becoming more and more open to the meditative scene, whether it's because of mindfulness or that.
Mhm.
Um, I think that it's just becoming more popular, but certainly at the beginning, I mean, being asked by people, oh, so you're Buddhist now? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, no, but if I was, there's probably nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with that,
Yes.
but I'm not, but yeah.
Right. Right. Um, Tell us a little bit more about, so you went to college and you said you studied religion, you studied philosophy. Tell us a little bit about your work. I love your work. I love your Instagram. All the quotes. Meister Eckhart seems to be a favorite. And he's a favorite of mine. But tell us, how did you get into the work you're doing, and what is the work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, um, I spent 7 years working at a nonprofit after college, and during that time, I was managing a community center. So I was working with refugees, youth from Kenya, Somalia, Tanzania, the Congo, really all over the world, though, Burma, and all over the place. And so for 7 years, was working like on the ground with tons of kids, hundreds of kids, and all throughout that time, I was keeping up with my contemplative practice. And I was compelled to start a centering prayer practice or a centering prayer group. And so I invited 6 friends, and we just gathered at a Catholic church. They just let us use their sanctuary.
Mhm.
And that would have been in 2013. And to this day, we continue to meet. So it's an 8-year-old centering prayer
Wow.
group. And we continue to meet on Zoom, of course, in this pandemic.
Yes.
Um, and that group is still together with far more numbers than the 6 people that it started with. But yeah, that was really the start of it, that I was always like on the ground, very much in an activist organization.
Mhm.
So like just doing all sorts of stuff. And then also living this like contemplative life in a sense behind the scenes, where prayer and reading and journaling and meditation were just like the groundwork to do the more active engagement. And so I just felt more and more compelled to just feed that contemplative dimension. And so pursued different trainings in that, with contemplative outreach as a centering prayer facilitator and presenter in the Shalem Institute and elsewhere, um, and eventually just left that work behind at the nonprofit just about, now I got to think, about 2 years ago, maybe a
Uh-huh.
little bit over than that. And now it's really shifted to become an online thing at this point through the
Yes.
pandemic, working as a spiritual director, working at facilitating contemplative prayer workshops, meditation workshops online, and also the Enneagram. I'm not sure if you're an Enneagram person or not, but I'm a
I'm
certified.
not yet, but I need to learn about it.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms to open up. But I really love bridging that, personality psychology, that the Enneagram has this very rich insight into the human psyche, and to pair that with the soul work of contemplative prayer and practice.
Okay.
Um, Hosting those sort of groups together are really a favorite for me. So.
So you're an Enneagram teacher?
Mhm.
Yes. Wonderful. So, and I know from your website, your beautiful website, that you also have courses on centering prayer that people can just take.
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah.
Is
Yeah,
it?
the primary course is called Closer Than Breath, and that really comes from Thomas Keating, who says God is closer than the air that we breathe. And
Yeah.
so that's a 6-week course, and it's really rooted in the Christian mystics. I try to create it as inclusive as possible, so to really create a sort of an interfaith atmosphere, but it certainly draws a wide mystical contemplative Christian crowd. And
Mhm.
that's, yeah, for those that are either brand new to centering prayer and don't have a meditation practice, or it draws a lot of centering prayer people that are already engaged in this practice and want to take it deeper. And so, yeah, there are lots of videos in that, but also weekly contemplative prayer groups that meet 2 days a week in the morning and evening, and then monthly gatherings as well. So it's really become this like beautiful online community, in a way I wouldn't have ever imagined 6 months ago when I got it started. So.
Yeah, I know stuff happened during COVID that is, I think that's going to continue,
Mhm.
when we get through this. And you just said something about, the inclusiveness, that it's not about, here's this religion, that religion. And you said that contemplative, the community is. I hear you say is very open to all of it. Do you think
Mhm.
that's a result, or yeah, a result of being a contemplative, that we're more open to
Mhm.
other people and paths that they take?
Yeah, I do certainly think that. I think it's the contemplative awareness that God is just more intimate to us than even our religious institutions tell us, and that God isn't a dogma or an idea to believe or a religious ritual to partake in, but a direct and immediate experience that's available to all beings in all places throughout all history.
Yeah.
And so the religions are good, and they are certainly gateways and pathways into God, but I think that contemplative awareness is just like God is right here, right now, and we don't have to do anything or say anything or even necessarily believe anything in
Mhm.
order to experience it. So the religions are good, but they're only doorways to pass through.
It's like Henry Nouwen, at least that's the image that I got from Henry Nouwen, that, if we think about these old spoke wheels, like
Uh-huh.
spokes all going to the middle, and no
Yeah.
matter what spoke you're taking, which
Hmm.
journey, they all go to the middle, and there's only
Hmm.
one middle. There's only one divine. Or I want to ask you something. So a lot of people now have trouble using the word God, at
Hmm.
least. So when I talk to people, they want to get away from that word, because that word reminds us, them, me,
Hmm.
the white guy in the sky with the beard, who's more like
Hmm.
Santa Claus than anything else, right? We're good, we get gifts. We're not good, we're being punished.
Hmm.
Can you tell us more about, you're saying God is closer than breath.
Hmm.
Yeah, I to myself, yes, I experienced that.
Hmm.
What about what about the word God? Like, are you replacing it? I know Eckhart Tolle, for example, he replaced the word God with being,
Being, yeah.
capital being.
Mhm.
And when we use that word, I think there again we put stuff onto that word. Like, if we get hung up on these words, we're missing God altogether. Is my
Mhm.
understanding. Um, where are you in that? In that God word image, like closer than breath? Tell me more about it, if you
Sure. Yeah.
will.
Well, I do like Eckhart Tolle's approach of being.
Mhm.
I personally use God. It just sort of flows off the tongue at this point, just because it's been so deeply ingrained. And there's certainly seasons and years where the last thing I wanted to do was to think that I was in a relationship with God, because it was that image of like the Lord, the like Lord over me.
Yeah.
And so, it goes in waves of being like almost utter disgust, and then almost like, well, it's just the word. And
Yes.
it's just the word I use. And so, yeah, I always just point to people to use whatever you need to use. If God is too masculine, because it is a masculine word, then use goddess.
Right.
If goddess throws you off, then throw it away and use the divine or the sacred or the holy. And I do appreciate that the idea of God is being itself. God is the ground of being, that God is not an object or a noun, but God is the ultimate subject of my deeper self. And
Yes.
so in that sense, God isn't anything. God is the nothingness that is everything. God is the open, empty space between myself and the computer right now.
Yeah.
So the word God is helpful as long as it's helpful. And if it's not helpful anymore, then it's time to let it go and maybe it'll come back. But I kind of see God constantly being crucified in my own mind and then reborn and crucified and
Mhm.
resurrecting,
Mhm.
and that just being an ongoing process with new images. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about crucifixion, are you observing Lent, or is that something that is in your spiritual being, or?
yeah, only superficially, I'd say. Yeah, I grew up with it. It was never a big part of life growing up, and so every year I do little things here and there, but it's nothing overly over the top for me. In some ways, I wish it was. I probably take the New Year's more serious than I take Lent. So,
Yeah.
although not this year, I gave myself a break because I used to give myself like 10 or 15 New Year's resolutions, but we don't have to do that.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Good. So, Keith, I think we touched on, the God image, like where you're coming from, and where you are now in your work and in your spirituality. Can you talk a little bit about the practice you do personally? Do you do centering prayer every day, or your readings? What is your practice?
Yeah, yeah, good question. Well, it's primarily centering prayer
Mhm.
is my go-to method of meditation, and so that's my my morning ritual. Is I'm a coffee guy, so I have my coffee. I journal every day. I have reading every day in the morning, and use that time, really a good hour if I can get it all in, to have some reading, some writing, and some self-emptying, and that's really how I see centering prayer. And I love the work of Cynthia Bourgeot. I'm sure you do too. She's such a wonderful centering prayer teacher. And
Yes.
yeah, using centering as a way of self-emptying, not to achieve emptiness, because we're always full of thoughts. The thoughts come back, the emotions come back, but to sort of surrender ourselves, to give ourselves over to what we want to call God, or what some would call God. But to let go and trust that we're being held in something beyond ourselves. So
Mhm.
yeah, centering's the primary method, certainly.
Mhm, mhm. And you said like during COVID time now, it has taken off with centering prayer groups online. And I know on Saturdays, is it the first Saturday or the second Saturday of a month, you actually do have an open group where you teach.
Hmm.
And I've been part of it, and I love to come back. And I have another spiritual direction group on Saturday, so sometimes
Uh-huh.
it doesn't happen. But is it the first Saturday or the?
It's now moved to the third Saturday. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So the third Saturday at 10 o'clock Eastern time. And I try to keep them short, 90 minutes. It gives an opportunity for, guided meditation, a little bit of teaching, and then the 20 minutes of silence. So those are, yeah, beautiful spaces for people to gather.
Yeah, wonderful. I'll put the links on, with the video
Mhm.
on online, so people, if are they invited to
Oh,
participate?
certainly. Yeah,
Yeah,
I keep them free
yeah,
so people can jump in. Mhm.
wonderful. Um, Keith, if there's anything you want to share with people who are watching this video, listening to it, what is there something you would love to share that's on your heart?
Mm. Well, I think most, what I like to point towards is practice.
Mhm.
That was what for me really sparked my own sort of development, my inner work. I was always interested in spirituality and had different practices, but it wasn't until I really took seriously centering prayer. And it doesn't have to be centering prayer. There's a lot of contemplative prayer practice. There's millions of meditation practices. And so you find something that works for you. But I just really encourage people to take on something in the silence, that we can meet ourselves sort of in our bare naked being, and where we can meet God in God's bare naked being, where God isn't dressed up with all the religion and dogma that we've been given.
Mhm.
So I just really always encourage people to practice. So that doesn't mean stop reading your books or stop journaling or stop praying and start doing this, but to add on a practice that is about self-emptying and surrender is just it's brought me to a good place, and I know hundreds of others
Mhm.
that has done just the same. So
Yeah. Well, it certainly has changed my life since ever I started 20 years ago. Um, and it was confusing to kind of think what are you using? Like Thomas Keating, I know, said it's not a method, right? Centering prayer is not a method, but the using the prayer word to come back. We can use the breath. We can use feeling into our body, like the Vipassana. Um, listening
Mhm.
or counting our breath. I mean, I don't, there's so many different methods, and I hear you say no matter what, but practice, right? Yeah.
Practice is the best teacher,
Yeah.
because it's so easy. It's so fun to like listen to Richard Rohr, for example. I don't know who your audience listens to here, but listen to Richard Rohr or Thomas Keating or Cynthia Bourgeot or whoever it is, or you read the book on contemplative spirituality and then you put the book down and you go make a sandwich, but you don't practice.
Yeah.
It's so easy to do that. And I did it for years. It took me 3 years to move from reading about it to doing it. But so it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of learning something new without doing it. We
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to, we don't learn to swim by reading about it. We learn to swim by jumping in the water. So That's the real invitation with this inner style work.
Okay. Yeah. So it's really like we learn to pray by praying and not by reading about it.
Yeah.
That's what you said. That's wonderful. I so appreciate talking to you about it, and I know that a lot of people are hungry for this kind of spirituality nowadays. That coming out of ourselves, not being told what to do, but really kind of going within and experiencing. I think that's where a lot of people are, and that's what you're teaching, and that's what you're doing, and I think it's wonderful. And thank you for all the work you do on Instagram. I'm just so all the posts you do and all the quotes and the wonderful things. So I thank you for your time, and we will put this online for everybody to see. I'll put it on the Facebook. I'll send you the link, and everybody who would love to watch and listen, we'll also let them know what you do and where you do it and how they can get in contact with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's been so good to talk with you.
It was great to talk with you. Namaste.
Namaste.
Wonderful. Thank you.